Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on the part of the world you are from. And thank you for joining us for our very first Paleontologists Against Systemic Racism Paleo stream. The idea of these was to help to explore the underrepresented formations, fauna, and paleontology of many parts of the world, mainly the former Gondwana, so places in South America, Africa, India, Madagascar, as well as Eastern Laurasia, so places like Mongolia and China. Today, and we would also want to look into sort of the colonial history, how that's impacting paleontology today, and how that's impacting the science, and really the way forward and the way to sort of bridge this gap, and really, shed a new light on many of these amazing formations, fauna, and also to highlight the paleontologists and those workers who are working on these fossils and their struggles, and showing how we can help to remove this bias and systemic racism from the field of paleontology, which we all deeply love. And today we'll be exploring, I think, a very, very relevant group, the Santana group in Brazil, the home of probably the most publicized, politically publicized dinosaur or fossil to date, Ubirajara, and rightly so. And therefore, we thought it was most befitting to start the Paleo streams with exploring the home of Ubirajara. But before we get started, I'd like to give a special thank you to our team. So Joshua, Natalia, Danny, and Gabriel. And a very special thanks to our special guest, Dr. Taissa Rodrigues. And thank you so much for coming. Your expertise and your wisdom will undoubtedly be such an asset to this stream. And additionally to the other members of our team, such as Julio, Sky, Sean, Omar, Tito, Adeline, and Junmei, and many, many others who've helped to put this together and helped the running of Paleontologists Against Systemic Racism. So just a bit of brief housekeeping. We will shortly be setting a paleo art challenge, and you watching are able to take part as well. Please use the hashtag Santana art, and therefore, we can also show your art and potentially make a video if you like to at the end subsequently as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the Twitch channel. And if you are watching but don't have a Twitch account, please tag us on Facebook, and we'll hopefully be able to get your questions answered as well. So just a very brief introduction to the Santana group before we set the art challenge, to give our artists, Joshua and Gabriel, enough time to be able to produce some amazing sketches. So it's from the early Cretaceous of Brazil, and it's sort of a coastal lagoonal setting, and has an amazing array of really well preserved fossils, including insects, fish, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs. Most famously being Ubirajara, which is the first feathered dinosaur discovered from Gondwana. And unfortunately, it was illegally exported and still being held in Germany. But more about that later. Now, I think I will start off setting now. So, the art challenge is you can choose any fauna or flora from the Santana group. So we've got Ubirajara, Tapijara, Irritator, huge array of fish and insects as well. And one different group.
Hoo-ha. Cass, you're becoming a robot.
Having some audio issues, yeah.
I think now it's fine. Let's try again.
Try again? Okay.
I think now it's better. The moment you were like, So that moment became liquid again.
Okay, no worries. We'll start the amazing technology in the 21st century. Some things never let you down, do they? And other things never work. So, okay, so I'll set the art challenge again. So you can choose any flora or fauna. So this could be insects, fish, pterosaurs, dinosaurs from the Santana group. There'll be bonus marks if they are from the same formation, and bonus marks if you include more than one group, and additional bonus marks for additional groups after that. So for example, if you were able to include in a realistic scene here, fish, insects, plants, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs, that would be like additional 5 or 6 bonus marks. You watching can also take part, so please use the hashtag Santana Art, and you can post that on Twitter or our Instagram as well if you like. And we may make a collection at the end, like a short video for those who would like their art to be further published. Please, art challenge is set, and we'll catch up with you in maybe about 20 minutes, seeing how it goes, and then we'll catch up with you after that as well. So, just before we start the in-depth look at the ecology, I would like to hand over to Dr. Taissa, to sort of give an overview of the Santana group and to show some of the fossils that she has at hand. So over to you.
Yeah, I do have some things. Thank you, Cass. I am so thrilled to be here today with you, like on the first Paleo stream. So, wow, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I have been studying fossils from the Santana group since I first went into my master's. So, sometime, let's not just put in on those numbers. We don't need that. But I normally specialize in pterosaurs. I say normally because, well, my students, they sometimes study other things. So I have students working on pterosaurs. I have students working on insects as well, all from the Santana group. And soon enough, I'll have some students working on the coelacanths from the Santana group as well. So it's pretty cool. The biota there is fantastic. It's somewhat related to the breakage of Gondwana. So at some point during the Cretaceous, we began having some breakage between the northeastern part of Brazil that goes like this and some part of Africa that goes like that. So I'm sorry, I have to cough. Sorry. So at some point, well, the ocean began forming, but also we got some breakages that went inside the continent, the Brazilian continent. And those breakages, they didn't go anywhere, they just died. But then some water began filling up those gaps. Because of that, we had some very large lakes. For instance, the Crato Formation is a unit that was formed in what was a freshwater lake. There is some evidence that from time to time we got some salty water going into the lake, and then some of the, well, many of the freshwater insects would die. So we have lots of mass mortality layers of insects, and also from these tiny fishes that are very common from the Crato Formation. So from this geological unit, we have a rock that's called a laminated limestone. It means that every time we got these rocks, they look like this. So it's very thin layers of calcium carbonate. The fossils are incredible. We have so many fossils from different kinds of insects and arachnids and fishes, but also freshwater turtles and some dinosaurs, for instance, Ubirajara as well, some very nicely preserved crocodilians, or crocodilomorphs, better to say like this, and pterosaurs, of course. So I have here today some of the insects, because this was a freshwater lake. So, you know, insects were really, really plentiful, especially those ones. This is a mayfly. So you can see here, like the Taissa part of the body, the abdomen, the thorax, and part of the head. Not everything is preserved. And I don't know if you can see, I think not, but just next to the body, we can see some of the gills. So this was a freshwater insect. They lived for perhaps a few days to months as a larva, and then they would just change into an adult. And the adults, well, the mayfly adults, they normally just live up to a few hours. So we don't have many of those fossils like this. We can see the wings, actually just 2 of their 4 wings that this insect should have. So this is the very usual preservation of insects from the Crato Formation. Normally, the vertebrates are also very flattened, but it's not that bad being flattened because we can see a lot of incredibly preserved soft tissues as well. So there's a lot of things yet to be studied from the Crato Formation regarding soft tissues. There are pterosaurs with the head crest preserved, like soft tissue head crests, not only the bony head crests. There are some pterosaurs where you have the Rhamphotheca, that's the horny part that would cover part of the beaks. You can have also pterosaurs with part of the nails. So it's incredible, really. And of course, now you have seen those papers already describing what's supposed to be pterosaur feathers. So some paleontologists don't think they're feathers, they think that they're like convergents, but still they are preserved in the Crato Formation, really, really beautifully preserved. After some time, this formation, or as a matter of fact, the whole environment began changing, and the ocean began just pouring some water inside the lake. So the lake went into a phase that was really, really salty, and sometimes we would get like something more like a mixoline water. So that's the Romualdo Formation. It's a whole different environment, and we do have different preservation as well. So there's a lot of fossils there. They are preserved inside the concretions. So the concretions, I have seen people comparing them to kinder eggs. So they're like round things, and you just crack them open and there's a surprise inside them. So I brought here today some of the fishes, very incomplete fishes I had with me. So that's one of the kinder eggs we have from the Romualdo Formation, says the fish, a small one, and this is a somewhat larger one. You can, I hope, see here that they're preserved in 3 dimensions. So it's really, really cool. The pterosaurs are really, really well preserved. The dinosaurs as well. There are some dinosaurs, not so many, but there are. Like, you know all about Angaturama and Irritator, I'm sure, because everyone loves the Spinosaurids. There are some very nicely preserved pterosaurs, of course. So it's fantastic because they're very well preserved in 3 dimensions. Lots of fishes. We do have marine turtles as well. So crocodilians, you name it. There's a lot of things. There are so many different things to study from there. So that's it. Do you want me to try to show you something else? I think that's it. I mean, I'm not sure how much I can show with this kind of camera, but yeah, you can see some details. I think like there's the eye of the fish and all. Yes?
Yes, no, wow, thanks. Those are amazing specimens. And it actually is on par with the preservation often associated with the Johor biota in China. And, you know, we have potential pterosaur feathers or other soft tissue structures. We have amazing insects preserved, and we also have the amazing Ubirajara preserved as well. So I think now would probably be maybe a good chance to discuss sort of Ubirajara and sort of the ramifications of what's happening with Ubirajara.
Oh, so, yeah, there's a lot to talk about it. Yeah, so the Santana Formation the fossils have been known for a long time, but the place wasn't really explored commercially. So people would just sometimes happen to find fossils. It wasn't that common. But from the 1980s to the 1990s, people began exploring those rocks, like for mining purposes, because it's calcium carbonate, and you can sell those rocks. It's very useful. It has lots of uses. This is a very like poor region of the country, or it used to be poorer, really, during the 1980s and 1990s. So it was very complicated place to live. It was very poor. Of course, we do have, well, universities there, but working in a mine is something for the working class. So it was very difficult time, and people began buying those fossils. The thing is, since 1942, it is forbidden to buy or sell fossils from Brazil, because I know each country has their own legislation on the matter. Some countries say, oh, it's fine if you find this in your property, so it's yours. That goes for oil or water or fossils. For Brazil, it doesn't go like this. Anything that's like resources found underneath the ground don't belong to, you know, private persons. They belong to the whole country. So that means if you find a fossil, you know, you own a mine, and you find a fossil or 2 or 70, they don't belong to you, actually. They belong, you know, to every Brazilian. So that's the thing. Since 1942, that's way, way before people began mining the Romualdo and Crato formations commercially. And then what happens is that during the 1980s, a lot of those fossils left the country. And they were bought, I mean, illegally by private persons and museums. So they began being, you know, appearing in the literature, being named, being described. It doesn't mean that they were legal. It means that someone bought them. That's it. That happened before for the Romualdo formation. This one that has the concretions. So they would just, you know, put up those concretions somewhere and just export them illegally. There's no paperwork allowing the export or sale of those fossils, because they should belong to the whole, you know, the country and to the people. And then after a few years, the Crato formation and those laminated limestones began being commercially exploited as well. And it's super easy just to hide a fossil if you find it, because you can just cut them and just, you know, ship the rock, just if you want to use it for decoration or whatever, or civil construction. And those fossils began being bought, once again, illegally, by people or private persons, a lot of private persons or private collectors, but also a lot of museums and institutions that should know better than buying things that aren't exactly legal. So they also began being properly described because no one cared. That's it. People began describing things and publishing, and editors just pretended not to care about the legislation. And it really, really hurt the region, because that was a region that was neglected for decades, actually. Things have changed a lot in the last few years, in the last decade, I can say. The lab over there, the paleontology lab, has grown a lot. The university has grown a lot. They actually have more than one public university. So public universities in Brazil, they're the ones where most of the research is done. I know it also is different, you know, from country to country, but here the public institutions, they build like the most of research is done there. They also have a museum that was built by the vision of one of the university's rector, and now the museum is super important. It is in a very, very small town where these fossils come from. So people from all around the country, they go there to visit the museum, but especially young people who are, you know, high schoolers or junior high schoolers. It's pretty, pretty cool. The thing is, we are talking about smallish cities or even towns in the middle of Brazil, in the region that's in the northeast. That's not really not one of the largest cities. Most larger cities are in the southeastern part of the country. So the northeastern has always been seen as poorer and undeserving of studies of keeping their fossils. So there's a lot of xenophobia that's related to studying those fossils and taking them out of the states where they have been originally found. So it's not illegal to just, for me to go there and do some field work and take the fossils to other states. But I mean, I don't think it's moral or it's not correct, because if I take here, I am in the southeastern part of the country, a lot of money already goes to those parts, while the northeastern part of the country is seen as less able to study them. It's really a xenophobic thing that happens inside the country, and it's a lot related to ethnicity. We know that most people who are Black or brown are from the northeastern part of the country, while the southeastern and southern parts of the country are mostly white. So there's a lot of problems going on, not just, colonial. I'm not even beginning colonialism yet. This is inside the country, xenophobia and racism as well. Now, when those fossils are taken out of the country, for decades, there were people that would say, why keep them in Brazil? You don't have, you lack the resources, you lack the knowledge to study them. I have been hearing those things for decades, and I know other countries have heard those things as well. This is just plain colonialism. This is a colonialistic view that people from, the global South aren't knowledgeable enough to just keep their own heritage. That's it. And most of the discussion usually goes the other way. People would just say, oh no, you said the word heritage. So I don't think fossils are heritage. It really doesn't matter, because according to our legislation, they are heritage. Doesn't matter if they're like environmental heritage, or the outcrops are heritage, or the fossils themselves. The law says it is heritage. So that's the problem. We are having our heritage, like natural heritage, being taken out of the country. For some pieces of legislation, fossils are even considered like cultural heritage. I know there's a lot going on to discuss this, but at the end of the day, it's something that belongs to, should belong to the whole country, to all people to study them here. And they're not taken out of the country in a legal way. They are smuggled. So, paperwork, it's not always involved. Someone would just show up with some very dubious paperwork just to show they had authorization, but we know that, authorization needs to go through a lot of bureaucracy. So just a simple letter is not proof of authorization. So that's a lot of things that happen, and it happened to Ubirajara. So Ubirajara is one of those fossils that was certainly smuggled out of the country after 1942. 1942 is the year we had this legislation that said the fossils, they don't belong to private persons, they belong to the country. And we are pretty sure that this fossil, this dinosaur, left the country after 1942, because the Crato formation only began being mined like intensively in the 1990s. So that's like a 50-year difference. What's happening? 50-year difference. Yeah. So what's happening? It's really virtually impossible that someone had this dinosaur that, they had feathers, and they took them outside of the country in the 1940s or 1930s. And then they took like several decades to realize they had a very important fossil just hanging around in the basement. It doesn't sound, it doesn't sound correct to me. It probably was exported or taken out of the country sometimes in the 1990s. But then it should have, gone through a lot of bureaucracy. My colleagues who have taken fossils outside of the country to just do a simple CT scan, they know this. It's very bureaucratic. You have to show that the fossil is going to be studied. It's going to be for an academic purpose. And it's not just someone, just writing a letter, oh yeah, I allow you to transport. Has this fossil been properly donated or not? So that's a problem. The thing is, it hasn't been properly donated. It doesn't have the proper authorizations to leave the country. And now, just as it happens to so many other fossils from Brazil, it is outside the country. So Ubirajara was described in this paper. I don't think it's like a preprint, but it was like accepted version of a paper that just appeared in an academic journal. It's kind of funny to think that the editor-in-chief of this academic journal is Brazilian, but he studies micropaleontology, and micropaleontologists, I don't think they're really worried about those things. They're more like for macroscopic fossils. Anyway, it was accepted. It was not the first time some Brazilian fossil was accepted there. It was just published. I don't think it was just finished, but still everyone could read it. And then people were very angry because the paper said they had an authorization, but this authorization wasn't shown. No, there's a lot of papers that just say, oh yeah, it was bought and no one cares. But then we actually asked for the paperwork to be shown. We asked for using the press, using email, using every single, way we could do it. A lot of people got very angry, of course, because of that. It was a very important fossil. It's unbelievable that it was like supposedly be forgotten in a basement for, I don't know, decades. Was it, taken out of the country in the 1990s? You do have like the first dinosaur with feathers from South America, and you just forget them about it on the basement. It's pretty awkward, isn't it? But then, okay, so those, the curator of the museum where Ubirajara is showed, finally they showed the letter of authorization of transportation to the press, to Brazilian press. And then it was very, very unusual letter because, well, for Joschua knows, I have lived in Germany for some time, and Germans, they're very bureaucratic. They like their paperwork well done. They like have insurance for everything. So just presenting a letter, just signed by someone, like typed and then signed by someone, and lacking proper, description of the details, just saying, oh yeah, you are allowed to take a box full of fossils. So how many fossils? Which fossils are those? This is very, very unusual. The person who signed this letter, they didn't have the authority to do so. That's the first problem. You can allow someone to, conduct a study, but you cannot allow someone to transport. It's gone beyond what they were, capable or in their capabilities. That's very strange. And then a lot of people began, trading letters, writing tweets or writing replies and all. And then a few months later, we heard from some government official, I think, that was in charge of the museum, and said that that letter that was presented to the press by the museum curator was actually not the one that allowed Ubirajara to leave the country, because Ubirajara was bought by the museum. So, wow. I mean, this curator, they showed us a letter. It was published in a newspaper and all. It's like official communication. And then somewhere like superior to them, they just say, no, this fossil was bought. It's very, very, well, strange to say the least. So here's the thing. The dates when this fossil arrived in Germany plays a very major role in the legislation regarding it, because Germany has this new legislation that will govern all sorts of cultural heritage, including fossils, and this piece of legislation is from 2016 or 2017. So had this fossil arrived in the country, in Germany, after this legislation went into, was published, I don't know if they published or whatever, but after this Kulturschutzgesetz, after this, so it would be considered illegal and, just be sent back to Brazil. But because the fossil arrived in the country before 2016, so it's now considered to be legally owned by the state of Baden-Württemberg. That's something worrisome, really, because there are so many other Brazilian fossils that are being held in those kind of institutions. There are at least 2 state museums in Baden-Württemberg, and they both have Brazilian fossils. Many of them are in Karlsruhe, really, and there's a lot of pterosaurs. I've seen only the pterosaurs, but I know they have crocodilomorphs and fishes as well. So there's a lot of things still there and waiting to be studied, really. So that's the thing. So that's why the government of Baden-Württemberg says they will not repatriate Ubirajara the dinosaur, because they, for the purposes of this law, consider the fossil to be legal. So that's differs from Brazilian legislation. For Brazilian legislation, if you sell something and you are not allowed to, you're committing a crime. And also, if you knowingly buy something that you should not buy, it's also considered a crime. But then for international law, both countries should have the same kind of legislation, just have to be, it had to be a crime here and in Germany, and apparently it's not. So it's a very complicated issue. It's not an issue that should be hard to, just solve. Really just talking about this and getting politicians, involved should do the trick. Unfortunately, that's not what's happening. So that's it. There's a lot of fossils there outside the country. You see those beautiful sketches. So there's Ubirajara, and it's very, very strange feathers. They are really unique. And there's also a pterosaur, that's Stupendactylus, that's also that has a lot of fossils from this genus outside of the country, including in the same museum where Ubirajara is. So that's an issue. Every time, I wanted to study, Brazilian pterosaurs, and I had to travel all around the world just to see them, because most of them are illegally taken overseas. So it doesn't sound fair. I have to go and travel a lot because fossils were illegally bought. So that's the issue. Nothing, everything sounds so bad, but there are other people, there are other researchers that are really willing to cooperate. There are some researchers from other countries, some researchers from, for instance, the US, who have repatriated some fossils. I know researchers in Europe, not sure if I can disclose their names, they're trying to repatriate some vertebrate fossils as well. So it all goes to cooperation. So there's nothing that a good conversation or cooperation between institutions, museums, universities can do. Everything can be done, nicely done. We can all cooperate just to repatriate some of those fossils. Sometimes, they can even come here and do fieldwork if they want to. It's not forbidden. The thing is people don't come to do fieldwork here. It's much more comfortable to just buy something that's being sold online.
Thank you for that insight and your wisdom and expose. That's been very insightful and at the same time extremely shocking. And unfortunately, it does show that some countries still perpetuate colonial practices and behaviours which are undoubtedly harming the paleontology of Brazil and paleontology of the global south and the global east. As like you said yourself, for you to study Brazilian fossils, you've had to travel across the world. If the fossils were in Brazil, researchers from around the world would go to Brazil. That will help further develop the paleontology institutions, the research centres there, as well as sort of out of respect. And like you said, many Brazilian paleontologists are very willing to collaborate and work together. As you said, with fieldwork opportunities, and that just shows the amazing resolve and sort of good nature of many of these paleontologists who want to study their heritage and research it in a proper and fair manner. From my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, the paper was retracted, so Ubirajara is technically is not a legal, not a scientifically valid name, as it were.
Yes. Yes.
From my perspective, I don't think any journal will now allow the publication of anything on Ubirajara because of its illegally exported nature, and therefore it does beg the question of why Germany is holding onto the fossil, where they will be unable to publish it, because this issue will not go away. I'm very sure the Brazilian paleontology community and that of the world will not forget about Ubirajara and forget about what's happened. So even in 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, 50 years in the future, the issue isn't going to change. So it really, they really should hand back Ubirajara to Brazil, even if by their argument it's not, they illegally own it. I think out of good faith and out of good practice and out of good sort of building relationships, they should hand it back on that merit. They don't need to, like other countries have handed back fossils as well, to other countries out of good faith and out of good nature. So.
Yes, I know. That's the thing, isn't it? Because if those authors, they're not going, to publish this anymore. The only way to solve this is just, to repatriate the fossil. It's not that hard. They already studied. And some of those authors, not all of them, of course, but they have also co-authored other very problematic papers describing other very problematic, Brazilian fossils. So there's this fantastic fossil from the Crato Formation that was supposed to be a snake with 4 legs. That's called Tetrapodolphis. Yes. The thing is, Tetrapodolphis is nowhere to be seen. It was supposed to be held at the museum in Zonhofen, but it actually belongs to a private collector. So in Germany, it is okay to be a private collector of fossils. Germans do this for 200 years or so, but it's not okay to have fossils if they're illegally obtained. So Tetrapodolphis is a fantastic fossil from Brazil. It is preserved like in 2 slabs. So you have most of the body of the fossil in one slab and some other parts in the other one. It's really, really, an outstanding fossil. It's unlike anything we've seen before. And it was published in one of those, very popular journals. I think it made it to the cover and all. And then, just from having this very fantastically preserved fossil, it is interesting by itself, but it was identified as a snake, and all snake specialists, they doubted. So they wanted to see the fossil to make sure it was a snake, or, to assess if it wasn't one. And then when people went to the Zonhofen Museum, a museum I've been to has a very nice exhibit, to try to take a look at this fossil, it wasn't available anymore. I think just one group of researchers was able to see it, but then it seems there was a minor accident with the fossil, some bone broke or something, and then it was taken off from the exhibit, and it's now back to a private owner. So how come this fossil has been published as being, held in a collection that was fully accessible to everyone, and now no one can see it now? So this one group that studied the fossil has reanalyzed it and found that it's a dolichosaur and not actually a snake. But I'm pretty sure other people want also to assess this fossil to know if it's a snake or a dolichosaur or perhaps something else. Now, there's a problem. No one can see it. The second problem is because it was bought and illegally exported, no one took note where the fossil came from. So the Araripe or the Crato Lake has like 180 kilometers long. So where from all these possible outcrops in 100 kilometers, like in length, I don't know how many other kilometers now in area in total, where does this fossil come from? Where to begin looking for it? That's the problem with those illegally obtained fossils. We don't have anything like geographic location where they came from, which city, which outcrop, we don't know. And even when we study a single outcrop, outcrops have several layers, and fossils can come from several different layers as well. So those layers are of different ages. So there's a lot of information we are lacking about those fossils. I don't even know where to start looking for a second Ubirajara or a second Tetrapodophytes, because I don't know where they come from. And a lot of those articles that have been published, a lot of those papers, they would just like mention a possible city where the outcrop is supposed to be, located, but I'm not sure. You cannot be sure about those things because they have been taken illegally. There is nothing like a stratigraphic control. There's no geographic control, because you don't actually write it down and you find something that you've taken illegally. You don't actually want people to know from which mine they come from. It's very, very, a very large problem for paleontology as a whole. We are losing information because people are buying illegally obtained fossils that lack any other information. I don't know where to find a second Ubirajara because I don't know from which city it came from. Am I going to start looking for a second Ubirajara in how many dozens of different cities, in hundreds of different outcrops? It's impossible task. Now, if I knew where those fossils come from, I could look for a second one, but I don't know. So there's a lot of information. This lack of information is really worrisome for a lot of fossils from Brazil, including the pterosaurs. I don't know, are there 20 different species of pterosaurs? Are there 10 different species of pterosaurs? If I knew exactly from which city, or perhaps even from which outcrop, from which layer they came from, I could actually have information on ontogeny, on differences between males and females, but I don't know where those pterosaurs came from. So I have to do a lot of try to do some work on morphometrics to try to figure that out, but I'm like shooting in the dark. I don't have crucial information to allow me to say, oh yes, those two pterosaurs, they look a lot alike and they have been found in the same outcrop or in the same city or whatever like that.
No, those are all extremely valid points, and I think if I might add, there's also perception to some degree that the biodiversity of Gondwana is significantly less than, say, North America and Europe, and I think that's you've just illustrated why that is sort of a sampling bias, and not actually the case. Yes. Because you could have a huge array of pterosaurs, crocodilomorphs. You have a huge array of sort of different types of theropods, different types of dinosaurs. You have probably sauropods being more prevalent within Gondwana than in Laurasia. You have sort of Spinosauridae, you have Megaraptora, and you have a very a broad array of fauna which is different from Laurasia, and it sort of gets overlooked or gets taken to the side because the fossils have been illegally exported. People aren't able to analyze the biodiversity in the same way, and maybe show that we are towards the tropics compared to Laurasia, and there is a biodiversity gradient now. So there may be amazing fossils, trends, ecology to be understood. I think in the Irritator Formation, you have the oldest Megaraptora in Brazil, which actually from South America, sorry, and that actually shows a very different potential coexistence when Spinosauridae usually coexist with Carcharodontosauridae. So again, you have different trends, patterns, ecology that could all be investigated, and it's sort of been denied to those from Brazil, those from South America, and the paleontology community at large. So thank you for that, and thank you for that amazing insight, and really the struggles of those in the global south when it comes to paleontology. They are more than capable of studying their fossils. If they had their fossils, as people flock to, say, North America, or people flock to Europe to study fossils, people would do the same, and that has all sorts of benefits for paleontology as well as the local economy. And it's really sort of being denied, and being a legacy of the colonial era, where things are exported from South America, from Africa, from Brazil, back to North America, back to Europe, to England, to Germany. The very classical colonial powers, as it were, still, reaping the destruction that colonialism ensued. Are there any questions on the chat?
I think there are several questions on the chat.
Okay. Joshua or Natalia, would you like to read any of them out?
I think Natalia would need to tell, because I was mostly looking at my drawing.
That's fine. That makes complete sense. Don't worry, that makes complete sense.
And looking at because of some weird stuff is going on as soon as Gabriel started screen sharing. So I'm sometimes switching back and forth between different modes. So we not so we can see sometimes the presenter, sometimes the drawings.
Yes. Natalia or Danny, are you able to read out any of the questions?
Yeah, I haven't opened a Q&A session right now because we had a lovely conversations in the chat room, but no direct questions so far. So I'm waiting for them to scroll in. I put the Q in, so everybody, if you have a question that you want Taissa or any of the artists to answer related to Palestinian fossils or paleo art, just give me a go and I'll try to convey them.
I saw an interesting point being made about fossils from Tendaguru, from Africa, trying to draw a parallel between the situation there in the 1930s and Brazil today, with people coming in and removing those fossils. And yeah, it was an interesting comparison, I thought. So thank you, Hugen, for raising that point.
Yeah. As
a German question. Sorry. Yeah, Joshua, continue.
As a German, it's sometimes really difficult to talk about these things, because you also feel kind of like national shame for what the people of the past have done, but also it's tricky with stuff like Ubirajara. I think in part because it is now basically owned by the state of Baden-Württemberg, where it's now in the claws of the famous German bureaucracy, that makes it really difficult. Even if the museum wanted to, and I think they actually have an interest in that, because they now changed management. I think just a few months after the Ubirajara paper was published, the curator actually retired, and now the whole collection is under new management. And even if they wanted to give it back, they couldn't, because they themselves would break the law, because it's now part of the ownership of Baden-Württemberg. The law that made this all possible isn't uncontroversial over here, I have to say, especially because it also restricts what private not private collectors, but especially private fossil hunters can do within Germany, and there are political moves that try to work against this and change the law. And I think if this whole thing will be basically getting, if they update it, I think it would be the right moment to go in there and say, okay, why not change this paragraph here too, so we can more flexible react to these things. But yeah, unfortunately in the moment it will probably take a few decades, knowing how bureaucracy works over here, until we have something like that.
Joshua, how do things work regarding archaeological finds? Because there's also a lot of colonial influence from archaeology, and of course it's slightly different than fossils because it directly links to culture, and it's directly linked to imperialism of ethnicities. Is there a difference between push and public response to material that's archaeological in nature and things that are paleontological?
It is a little bit different. When you look at certain cases, especially in some of the bigger cities where similar, like every colonial power, Germany took a lot from countries they owned back in the day or exploited otherwise, or just had expedition to. It works a little bit better in that regard, but there's still a lot to do. There's a famous example, I think 2 years ago, a new museum in Berlin opened, and what they have there, it's mostly archaeological stuff and ethnological stuff, and usually these days you have some researchers there just for the provenance of certain finds, and it's a collection with more than, like, I think several million pieces in it, and for the whole collection they had like 2 or 3 of these provenance researchers. That shows you a little bit how much focus on the whole thing is really, and it could be a lot better. Although it's still not as shitty as with fossils.
Yeah, I hear other things about repatriation of Mexican and Australian artifacts and human remains, and of course it's slightly different and more seriously taken than fossils, because I guess there's still this kind of discrimination between fossils and being really as closely connected to human culture and just being some cool rocks and dinosaurs, which are not as serious, but of course they should be. Okay, but we have some amazing questions from some of our viewers, and Mr. Fossil01 is asking a question to Taissa. I have a question: how did pterosaurs start flying?
Sorry? How did
pterosaurs start flying?
Oh, I don't know. There's a very good question, because we actually don't know. I love those kind of questions. But there's some recent paper that proposes that the sister group of pterosaurs are the lagarpetids. So there are several hypotheses for pterosaur flight, and one of them by Chris Bennett, like published decades ago, he said that pterosaurs would just hop from one tree branch to the other. So it seems like from that, finding their lagarpetids or tree-dwelling lagarpetids were the sister groups to pterosaurs. So perhaps this is the answer. They started just jumping between branches or hopping. Isn't it fantastic? I mean, this is brand new information. This is from like 2 years ago from now. It's incredible. But we don't know anything about pterosaurs. If you want to study pterosaurs, do. No one knows anything. Isn't it? I mean, Natalia knows this. No one knows anything about pterosaurs. It
leads to amazing infights during symposiums, because nobody knows everything and everybody knows
everything.
Nobody
knows anything. I mean, we all love dinosaurs. There's so many people studying dinosaurs, and that's like 15 of us studying pterosaurs. So no one knows anything. It's incredible.
You look at the amazing fossils on the surface and think like, oh, that's an amazingly preserved thing. When you start looking in the microscope, like, oh, it's very hard to use it comparatively. It's very hard to study. So it's illusion of knowing a lot. But in practice, when you get to it, it's like, I can't do anything with that. And it's all the frustrations, because you have amazing fossils in front of you, but like, it's incomparable to anything. What do I do? And people start fighting because of it, because they're different things. So it's fun. Pterosaurs are fun. They're real hell to work with. But that makes them interesting. And, they're nice. I love them. Okay, so we have another question from Kennedy104, and it's more political. How difficult it is to legitimately research and navigate legislature within government to do research? So I guess if you want to pick up and start digging some fossils, how easy to do it legitimately? Which is quite an open question, because I imagine this varies from country to country, region to region, museum to museum.
I think the best, the easier path is just do a collaboration with someone. If you want to do, research outside of your country, it depends. Each country has their own legislation. Just team up with someone from the country where you want to go, some research group that has experience, and then they will just, fill in all the paperwork for you. It works great. I mean, sometimes you can just begin researching in another country. For instance, I think there are some provinces in Canada where only a few paleontologists are allowed to excavate in certain fossiliferous sites. They're very important fossiliferous sites. So, there's very restricted. But if you want to come here to Brazil, just, email someone and says, hey, when are you going to do on your next field trip? Just take me with you. It's, really, really easy. If you want to come by yourself, now you have to read a lot of paperwork and fill a lot of paperwork. But, collaborations, they really, really work. They work really, really well. There are some colleagues, they're not here today, but they're working with people from the US and from Europe, from different countries, and they all come to Brazil for, to study some fossils, to do actual field work. There's a lot of things you can do when we work together as a team, it's pretty cool. There's some very nice publications arising from fossils from the Permian of Brazil, from the Triassic of Brazil, with, large international collaborations. It's the best way. It's so much easier when someone else would just read the legislation and fill in the paperwork for you, and you just, appear with your hammer. I think it's the best thing. That's how I do things in China. I will never go there by myself, but I will team up with my colleagues, and they will just say, oh yes, please come, I don't know, next May, and I'll be there. It's fantastic, and it's a very nice form to not be, colonialistic towards other people. Working together, having, getting to know the culture, getting to know students, getting to learn from each other. That's the best way to work with, anyone else. So you get to learn the culture, get to learn the people, get to know the people who live in the area. That's the best thing, and I think it's way better, so you just don't have to, try to, solve all those riddles of different legislations.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's like additional flavor to your research when you get to interact with other people of other cultures, because otherwise you might not be able to do it. But with paleontology, you connect with so many people because geology is not limited by geography or the globe. Like we have some cool professors in China, we have some cool professors in Kazakhstan and Britain, and different people of different cultures living in those regions. So it's a great opportunity of actually meeting other things and learning things on top of the fossils. And I think it just adds to the flavor. Not only it's more ethical, better, and more equal, as a researcher, it's just better. I'm learning so much from about Latin America by just spending time with some of my colleagues and eating arepas and translators, and I'm absolutely being obsessed with cuisine. It's great. We are exchanging information about fossils, but also about ourselves. And yeah, that leads us to another question, which is, hello, Taissa and Natalia, and I think Cass can also, and other speakers can also go in. I have a question. How do you think you can call the attention from the general public to support us in the repatriation of fossils, like how it happened with Ubirajara on Twitter?
Oof. Yeah, I think like with Ubirajara on Twitter. That's it. Can we do this for other social media? Can we do like a hashtag for TikTok or something? I mean, that's really good. And another thing, well, that's harder to do, but just get press involved. Go and speak to reporters. If you can, of course. I mean, it's way more difficult doing than just saying this. But if you can, just talk to reporters, go to the press, do a hashtag, go to social media. That's really, really important. Doing the hashtag for Ubirajara on Twitter make a huge difference. We have to do this for other fossils as well. There's a lot of things going on in the world. We are discussing so many things right now. We are discussing fossils from Myanmar amber. So we should do a hashtag about this as well. So this is a whole different problem. I mean, it's really, really serious. Let's talk about the blood amber, for instance. There has been already things on National Geographic. So we already have things on the press, so we really need to get social media involved. So can we get something on TikTok? Can we get something on Instagram? Can we get something on Facebook? I mean, the more, the better.
And also amplifying voices of people from those regions that are affected. So if you know any research from Myanmar, any research from Gobi, any research like Taissa from Brazil, if there's an affected region and there's an academic, they need a voice. Because usually when you're not coming from US or UK, your voice is much, much quieter, especially on big global scale. So if you know somebody boost their voices up, because they are talking there. I think the amazing researchers that sadly sometimes not get as cited a lot as seen on global big Western news sources and things, and we should have this collaborative effort of doing it together. So yeah, it's a lot about calling it attention to it on social media, but social media sometimes it's small, and many of those things have to be done on more legislative level. Sometimes I might include writing petitions to your own government, even pushing for some lobbying, but that's much harder on individual level. But those are the things that might push for it. I would love to get involved with my local politics and something to help Mongolia repatriate fossils and do some posting up, but that will require a lot of connections high in the government. As paleontologists, we are not very well connected in those regards, sadly.
Usually, yeah. Something else I think that is important is here the involvement of local paleontologists also in the research. If I remember correctly, Brazil has this law that if you publish about Brazilian fossils, you also should have at least one Brazilian author on the team. Is that
yes and no. Actually, there isn't a law. We cannot have a law just saying,
so
you can only publish
like
a paper on this.
rule.
Yeah, there is a soft rule about doing field work. That's something that they say. You can go and come here and do field work, but you need like a sponsor. So if you're not coming here in a collaboration, then Ministry of Science will have someone as a sponsor for you. So that's it. That's a very nice way, just to promote Brazilian paleontology as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's the case for many other Latin American countries as well.
I think so. I think there's a lot of things, but like it should be common sense, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't make any sense for me that I don't know. Perhaps I will get a large grant, and I will go to Angola, and work by myself, or I'm going to Namibia and work by myself, only me and my group. That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, this is colonialism. This is a very colonialistic practice. You want to get people there involved. Don't you want to train, new people, new vertebrate paleontologists, new paleobotanists, new invertebrate paleontologists? I see you people from paleobotany here in the chat. I know there's so much we can do and so much we can achieve together. If I have a large grant so I can, pay for someone else's expenses, I will do this. This is collaboration. People who have more and more publications are the ones who, work in collaborations. That is how we are going, to solve several problems all at once. One of them being colonialistic, actions that people normally take.
Yeah.
This time, this has to be over. It's 2022. There's no reason we should go anywhere else by ourselves, just explore, and just take fossils out of the country, and then perhaps just take them back again to the country, but without involving people. That doesn't make any sense. We really want to build a larger group of collaborators, help people just by training them in new methods. If they need our help, sometimes people don't actually need our help at all. We're just being very presumptuous.
Yeah. No, but I think it's also important just to get more local paleontologists involved, because that builds their career. Because it's of course you building your career by writing papers or getting your papers cited, and if you aren't involved in these high profile papers with these amazing specimens, how could a local paleontology community ever grow to the same size as in Western countries? And therefore this stigma of the global South being less able to do their own paleontology persists, because in a way it's a constant feedback loop where fossils are taken out, so local paleontologists can't publish on them. So Western people say, hey, these people have no expertise with this because they don't have the fossils, and it goes around and round and round.
Yes, isn't it? It's a vicious cycle. So how can we improve someone else's working group, or someone else's career? Why not collaborate? Why not just exchange experiences? I think a lot of things go down to the problem of having funding. So funding for North Americans and Europeans, it's, I don't know, the grants are just so huge. My grants are so small. So I can only do, smallish projects as well. So that makes a lot of difference. For a lot of people, it is difficult to just go to, Europe or North America to attend a conference, to present new findings. And going to conferences and networking is crucial. And also getting some ideas, what are people working on right now? What are the new methodologies I could use? So it all makes, just goes bigger and bigger. The problem is, if you don't have money, if you come from a country where, your currency this ain't worth nothing next to the dollar or to the euro, it's so much harder to go to a conference and get things and stay updated on new methods, on new discoveries. It's so difficult. Not to mention other practices that are also hurting the global south, like huge article processing fees. Why are there so many super expensive APCs? Because sometime on the last few years, the European Union decided to go with Plan S, and one of the big publishers was made part of the conversation. So they just grabbed the whole hijacked the conversation, and now we all have to buy. We have to pay to publish our papers. Open access. It's insane how those practices go well beyond what we normally think of colonialism. They really have a lot of repercussions for science as a whole and doing research in the global south.
Thanks for that. And just to give a bit of overview. So at Paleontologists Against Systemic Racism, we are in the process of running several research projects with our collaborators from both the Global South and the Global East. So we're working to create mutually beneficial research proposals and research projects. So if anyone likes to get involved, please get in touch. We've already got many projects up and running, and there's been a really good response, and we are able to potentially study and hopefully over the next couple of years publish on fossils which may not have otherwise been able to be studied. So do get in touch on our Twitter, via our website, and we also wanted to support paleo artists from underrepresented areas as well. So do get in touch, because papers that have paleo art associated tend to get more publicity and potentially even more citations. So we also want to help underrepresented paleo artists as well. So do get in touch. And finally, there is you can hold me to this. We did have an idea of doing a TikTok challenge for Ubirajara. So you are aware of our Walk the Dinosaur Ubirajara video on Twitter and on YouTube. So it's got a lot of likes. And we will be kicking off an Ubirajara Walk the Dinosaur challenge. So I will kick it off hopefully in the next couple of weeks. You can hold me to this. Please do remind me if you haven't seen the video. We'll create a TikTok and we'll do who can do a good Ubirajara Walk the Dinosaur. And hopefully this will get more attention to Ubirajara, as there has been, for example, in the UK, probably about a few decades ago, the government actually changed the law to be able to return some hominid fossils to their countries of origin. So I believe if we come together as a community, if we raise our voices as one, and we put pressure and raise awareness amongst governments, amongst the paleontology community, we may be able to help or facilitate a quicker change in German law to be able to get Ubirajara returned. So if we dream big and we stick together, we can achieve amazing things. So we need to be able to do this, because if we do it with Ubirajara, we can do it with other fossils as well. And other countries have returned fossils in the last couple of years. So there is an appetite for this. There is Germany, for example, returned the Benin masks back to I think it was either Nigeria or Niger. I may have got the country wrong. So yeah, They've returned them recently as well. So there is an acknowledgement going forward of colonial practices. So if we do stick together and raise our voices, hopefully not in the too distant future, we'll get Ubirajara back to where Ubirajara belongs in Brazil.
Absolutely.
Okay. And do we still have some time for other questions, or are we close to the closing time?
No, keep going with the questions.
Okay, I have one for paleo artists for a change, which is related to many things. But when you're drawing for portfolio, what kind of advice do you give? What to include in your portfolio to get noticed? Because both Joshua and Gabriel, you do amazing paleo art for a lot of different genuses and different animals. When you advertise yourself, how do you do with your portfolios? Or do you have any? What's your advice?
Go ahead, Joshua, you can start.
I mean, maybe I can tell a little bit more about that because I have a classic art background. So when creating a portfolio, there are usually no rules but tools. You should try to create something that you like, but also that shows a little bit the range of what you produce. I think it's best to include mostly stuff that you have already produced in the past. Oftentimes when I know this from people who are applying to art academies, when they have their portfolio full of stuff that they produce just for the portfolio, it shows. It feels artificial oftentimes. So having stuff that you are proud of, that you already produced in the past, in there is, I think, important thing. At least that's how I did it most of the time. Then having when you have it in PDF form, try to keep it clean. Have usually in there some basic information about yourself. Don't include like page-long essays about why you did certain things, how you did them on your images. Nobody will have time to read that. I can tell you that. Try showing a little bit of experimentation with what you produce. I think is a good thing. Like having sometimes a little bit more stylized stuff versus some more photoreal or in general realistic. What you want to produce is a good thing. Like if you are mostly doing lateral views of tyrannosaurs, try to not include only lateral views of tyrannosaurs. Would be my advice. Yeah.
Well, I will preface this by saying that I hate giving advice to people because I think that especially artists, we all have a different way of doing things.
Yeah.
There's not really a right way to do things. Oftentimes, there's more like everybody has their own way of doing things, and there's room for everybody. In my case, I think that a portfolio should be varied, but only in the stuff that you're very good at. You know, we all have stuff that we are particularly better at. And so you should concentrate on showing those and showing stuff that if you have, think of a portfolio as your CV. Right? So if you already have stuff that you've presented that's been published or have been done well or have been in museums, include that. And it should be stuff that you really like doing, because one of the things that you can see in art is that you can tell when an artist is doing something because it has to be done, and you can tell when an artist is doing something because it's what he wants to do, what they want to do. So I say it's important in a portfolio that reflects that, and also tailor your portfolio to what you are applying for. So if you're nowadays also, I think sometimes the portfolio thing is kind of an outdated idea, because we all have our work online and people can view your work at a wide range online. And I think that's the portfolio right now. I mean, I know most of my clients contact me from the stuff that they see online, and I see that that's very important for artists nowadays to have an online presence and to keep, your stuff visible to potential clients. So that would be my advice, but take it with a grain of salt, because I think that everybody have to find their own path.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
And if I may, is there anything we can do to further support minority paleo artists as well? Because they're discussions recently.
Oh, Cass, you're going robot again. I'm sorry, we can't really understand you.
Your audio is cutting off, Kat.
Is disintegrating. Oh no.
Oh no.
We can't hear you, Cassius.
But okay,
Nope.
in this moment of silence, I can continue because I also do some art. But like with Joshua and Gabriel, we all have different approaches to art. We all have different art styles. We have different customer bases. So you can't have blueprint for paleontology career or art career. Everybody has different, and those careers are very look dependent. So carry your own path. Especially now, I don't have a professional portfolio, so I just put things on Twitter, and that's how I get jobs.
Artists. So is there anything that we can do, either as a community or as individuals? Okay, can you type? Okay.
The lag is real tonight.
Can I ask my question now? Is Natalia, if you can hear me, just continue with the other questions.
Okay. You disappeared for a moment. We had a little bit of confusion and of cross talking, but all right. There's one question directed to me, but I guess all of you can answer because you all work in paleontology. I have a question. Do you have any recommendations for non-school related activities one can do to get into paleontology professionally? And from my experience, I did quite a lot of stuff, but all of them were done for free, which I know a lot of people can't do, because when you do part-time, you might not be able to do volunteering, but I did a lot of volunteering. So I reached out to my local museums, which are not big paleontological museums. They reached out to them, and I did some education and outreach regarding animals and fossils. It was a small local museum, but allowed me to have a lot of experience regarding education and science communication. You can also join your local groups with an environmental purpose, so not everything has to be paleontology related. Because sometimes you might just live in an area where there's no big museums or big universities to get work experience, but something adjacent to paleontology is always useful. Paleontology is multidimensional. It intersects with chemistry, with biology, with geology, even with social sciences. So as long as you can get any experience that has transferable skills, that's a good experience to have. Also, academia is the biggest part to going into professional paleontology. You can also start as a hobbyist. You can find your own fossils and become your own collector. Some fossils are quite easy to prepare in your own house, depending on the fossil formation you're dealing with. So it all depends on the location you are in. Different places have different geology, they have different resources. So you have to go look around, ask people out, make connections, and see how you can use them to build up your portfolio, which can be related to geology of your local area, but also something very, very independent, and then sort of build your career from there. There's no blueprint to follow regarding paleontology, just because it's so diverse, so varied. So just go out there, seek different opportunities, and take them if you can, because you never know which pathway can take you, and it can take you into brand new, novel way of expressing paleontology and following it. But yeah, I guess Taissa might have different, Joshua and everybody else, we have different experiences of going into paleontology. We all have different CVs and different pathways. So how did you get into the place, and how would you recommend someone to get into paleontology who are just following the academic career pathway?
I mean, yeah, I would agree with all of that you said, Natalia. For me, in my career, a lot of it has been about proximity. So just putting myself where the action is. Like when I was in high school, I was lucky enough to be able to volunteer at a museum. And later on in my life, when I, didn't have the wherewithal to volunteer, I was lucky enough to be able to work at museums and places nearby. So even if you can't necessarily volunteer at a museum, and even if you're not in school, maybe you can pick up a job at the museum as a janitor or something like that. But just being in that general space can be very, very helpful. So yeah. Again, I want to emphasize, I know not everybody has the wherewithal to volunteer. Maybe you need to, to work to make a living. I'm very aware of that. But it's about being around other paleontologists as much as you can be, being around fossils, and doing a lot of learning on your own too. All of the best learning that I've done and the most rewarding stuff has not been in school. It's not been in a classroom. It's been working in museums, talking with other paleontologists, and going out and doing field work too. It's easier for certain people than it is for other people because of economic circumstances and stuff. But that was my recipe for success. And yeah, take that for what it's worth.
I wish I could have had this kind of advice when I was a teenager, because it never, ever had occurred to me to just knock on the museum's door and ask to do some voluntary work there. And I have ever been, in love with paleontology ever since I was a kid. And I had never considered this. It wasn't, it never occurred to me it was possible to do this. So I waited a whole long time to get into paleontology. It's amazing. If you live, somewhere, closest to a museum, go there and just knock on their door, just ask for something, ask to, do some work, perhaps on the weekends if you can attend, during the weekdays. This is the kind of advice I wish I had, because when I was a teen, everyone thought it was so funny that I wanted to be a paleontologist. And as it wasn't a real career, it's something out of the movies, but it is a real career. It's pretty cool. So this is great advice. Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Yes, so that's good. So I think, like many of the other speakers and guests have said, there is a real benefit reaching out to different paleontologists and museums. But one thing I would recommend people doing, if you really want to get into paleontology, is to email different paleontologists, because so many I have emailed are super, super nice and so willing to help. And if you really want to get involved, they will give you maybe more advice depending on what part of the world you're from. Maybe it would help you with countries, but they also potentially, if you say that, they may be able to have offer you fieldwork opportunities as well. So do reach out, do network. That really is sort of key in paleontology. Yeah, who but majority of paleontologists are super, super nice. And if on the slim chance you don't get a nice response, don't worry, because there'll be those more who will give you a nice response. And something else someone advised once is even sort of studying anatomy, and you could do it when you're cooking the chicken and other fish. You can start learning anatomy from the bones and stuff like this, and that puts you in good stead. So there is an element of being resourceful, as well as reading around the subject. Going to museums, and yes, not everyone's able to volunteer, and there is this issue, especially sort of in the UK, about who can become a paleontologist, and there is this sort of potential, class or social structure, and people are trying to change it, but it's harder to change. But do really just reach out to paleontologists, and there's so many I've reached out to, are amazing. They're like really famous people. I don't want to give any names, but they're really, really famous, but they're super, super, super nice and helpful. Are there any more questions, Natalia?
And no, I think that was the last question. We have some problems with connections, so our stream blacks out on Twitch quite a lot. Right now it's unavailable. So okay. I think it's something maybe on end of the hoster.
Okay, hold on.
Recording in progress.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to record it from here, so we can just upload it onto YouTube, like the last bit. So there's no more questions. So what I will do is, firstly, the art challenge. Do you have a quick look at the art challenge?
My connection here is also lagging right now.
Don't worry, it must be the time of evening. It must be that busy time where everyone's using it. So, yeah, don't worry. So what we'll do for those who are watching this...
And I'm the one who's having a tropical storm coming by, and you're having all these problems with connection, huh?
Great.
Yeah, the joys of the 21st century.
Yeah, no, but I'm just looking on
so
Twitter,
what we'll do
and
is we'll just
there are actually already quite a few pieces online.
Okay, so what we'll do is that's really, really great. So thank you everyone who's taken part. So what we'll do is we'll gather them up and might just do a short recording and highlighting them in a separate recording and just upload that video because it looks like everyone's internet's really dying at the moment. So thank you for everyone who's taken part. It's really appreciated, and we will be highlighting your art in another separate little sort of showcase video of this hashtag Santana art. Our first PA stream, so thank you. And thank you for all our guests and all our speakers. So there will be a TikTok challenge in the near future, but I'll just give a brief summary of what's going to happen. So over the summer period, or between, is a very, very intensive time for paleontologists, a lot of field work, a lot of traveling, a lot of conferences. So we will be having a follow-up paleo stream, but this won't be till September, just due to the availability of paleontologists and fieldwork and conferences. But we do hope to welcome you back in September, and we have a real good discussion of paleo streams planned for September. So topics will be including Spinosaurus and the colonial impact then, as well as Tyrannosaurus rex, and there is a real interesting bias discrimination story behind T-Rex, which is often overlooked, as well as Velociraptor and how species alongside Velociraptor was discovered. Some of it's quite shocking, as well as the portrayal of the Pleistocene and Ice Age megafauna such as mammoths and Australian megafauna. So we've already discussed them. They've got a really good, exciting and interesting backstories and other views which aren't often discussed. So we'll be exploring that from September. So do check out Twitch and Twitter. And we will also be making a TikTok now because we've got our TikTok challenge. So we'll be on there in the near future as well for updates on this. And then again, on the 23rd of July, we have an event called The Impact of Colonialization and Racism on Paleontology, where we'll be discussing how the scientific narrative and the scientific perspective has actually been influenced by colonialism and how it's currently been impacted. So we'll be discussing, again, T-Rex, everyone's favorite, but also showing that from a new perspective, as well as portrayal of, for example, fauna and flora from Gondwana, and what can be done going forward. So a very, very special thank you to Dr. Taissa Rodrigues for coming today. Such an amazing talk, amazing input, wisdoms, and without, you've really made this one really, really special. So thank you so much for coming. It would not have been the same without you. Thank you for the rest of the team, Joshua, Gabriel, Natalia, Danny, and everyone else. And thank you for everyone who's tuned in to watch this. And apologies for all the internet connections, but we have got through it, and hopefully I'll see you in the future. So thank you everyone for coming. Thanks a lot.